welcome to Native Dev. How are you?
Good. Hi, Simon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And Doug, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been around the industry for 100 years. And within the last, I'm a Microsoft MVP for 16 years. And I've been playing with AI, the current AI, since the 80s. Well, it's not current, but then just the latest generative AI in the last few years. And it's just absolutely fascinated me. And I'm now taking it to the next chapter, the Model Context Protocol, MCPs. So looking forward to presenting on this today.
You obviously, with the history of that long in the AI space, you obviously go way, way deeper than any of the.
Well, I don't know about deep. I certainly go way back.
Well, I say nonsense. Vibe coding is incredible fun and fit for purpose for a specific purpose for that prototyping and stuff. That just makes it that much more accessible to people who aren't developers, people who want disposable apps, those kind of things. But you know, I guess the areas that you go into are far more in depth in the machine learning space. So we're all looking forward to hearing your wisdom and talking about MCP. So, okay, Doug, I'll pass over to you. Have a great session.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name's Doug Finke. As I mentioned to Simon, I'm going to be doing a talk on Model Context Protocol, Anthropic's MCPs, and we'll get into that in a bit. Going to have a quick slide here, then a little bit of a demo, and then back to slides. So I'm a 16-time Microsoft MVP. I wrote a book called PowerShell for Developers, and I organized the New York City meetup for many years. And it's now a live stream that I do. I do multiple ones per month. I cover all kinds of technology specifically, and most recently, all in the AI space. I actually have one coming up next week. I'm going to do an improv, AI prompt improv hour. So if you want to head over to that meetup, I'm going to take questions from people in the audience, and we're going to just live prompt and see if we can solve different kinds of problems, both technical, marketing, whatever actually comes up. If you want to stay connected, you can find me on all the social media platforms. I've got a YouTube channel with lots of videos. I don't like doing long videos except for my meetups, and I do lots of little videos on MCPs. How do you incorporate it? How do you make agentic searches with an MCP and whatnot? This is a recent one I put up, and you can find me over there. Cool. So let's get out of the slides, and we're going to just do some coding. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code. And if you can't see that, let me know. I can bump up the font if that's good, if it's bad. And so I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. I'm going to use Visual Studio GitHub Copilot in there. And they have a host. They host MCPs similar to Claude Desktop and to have Windsurf as well as Cursor AI do the same thing. And what I'm going to show here is this is how you set up a simple JSON config for an MCP server. And this is similar to how you do it inside of Claude Desktop, for example, except here I think you do an MCP servers. You just name the tab.
Hey, Doug, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just if you could just enlarge the font, that would be
absolutely
awesome. That would be brilliant. Thank you. I know it's harder to code, but I'm sorry.
It's all good. Does that work a little bigger, or is that fine?
Yeah, maybe even one more, but whatever hopefully works as an in between.
All right, this will be fun.
Maybe one less, because now it's getting awkward.
We'll go down. We'll get it just right. Cool. So this is basically how you do an MCP server. I'm going to do initial one. We're going to do a standard I/O. There are ones like HTTP. You can do things with NPX, all different kinds of types. And I'm going to show you how to do one quickly in Python. So I have an MCP server.py. It's really super simple. And you can do a pip install on the MCP, fast MCP. And these are maintained officially. And they have these types of SDKs for all different languages, for TypeScript, for .NET, so on and so forth. So I'm going to actually just create two functions in Python. One is going to be called multiply, takes two variables, A and B. And I'm going to have one read CSV, which we may not have time to get to. So I'm just defining the multiply as return A star B. Now, I'm going to go back over here to my MCP JSON, and I'm going to click on the start. So this is going to start up my MCP Python. I'm going to hit restart so we can see the actual messages. And the MCP host, and this is the same thing that again happens in the Windsurf cursor and Claude Desktop. It tells you that it's starting it. It does tool discovery. Inside of Visual Studio Code, I can click on this toolbar, and now I can see that I have my server with my multiply and my read CSV tools ready to go. Now, let's see how we make that work. So once all that's up and running, okay, and again, you can do this with Python, TypeScript, JavaScript, .NET, similar setups to invoke and to get your tools working. And you're just basically using standard code that you're used to. So if you're familiar with programming in Python, you're going to define a function just like this, as you always have. You're going to add a decorator, and you're off to the races. So over here, now this makes my multiply what they call agentic, right? And what does that mean? So if I type over here, what is 7, pick some random large number with some decimals, times this number, and I'm going to take that exact, what's happening now is Copilot inside of Visual Studio grabs that and says, okay, I'm going to figure it out. I can see that there's an MCP tool called multiply. It doesn't execute it, and it gives me the note that MCP servers or malicious conversation content may attempt to misuse code through these tools, right? If I gave you this tool, you need to do a little bit of diligence, figure out, am I trustworthy? Is my tool trustworthy? Does it come from a third-party vendor? Does it come from Anthropic or from other vendors that you know of? So anyway, so I found the tool, and it wants to pass those two numbers that I just randomly chose into the multiply, and I'm going to say, it gives you the opportunity to continue. So there is a safety feature. If I want, I can drop this down. If I don't want to keep answering the continue, I can say, well, just allow for the session or for the workspace, or I can always allow that. So there's a bunch of different options, but you're in control. So it's going to call my multiply tool, nothing fantastic going on here. And it should give me the right number. And I'm going to copy this out, hopefully correctly. And so we get that number. And if I come down to this console here and I multiply that out, we can see that it does it correctly. I'm going to bounce back over into ask mode, where it doesn't use the MCPs in ask mode at this point, I believe. Hopefully, I usually do this the other way around. But let's see what happens if I ask it now. It shouldn't ask me for MCP or tell me that it's going to invoke that tool. And always when you do live videos with AI. Now notice, it comes up with 43654, but the number is over here on the right, 43655. So basically, Claude Sonnet hallucinated the calculation result. That's the reason why we use agents and we give it tools, right? So that it can actually say, oh, I have to do a multiplication. Well, I'm not good at that, but I'm going to use a tool for it. And then when we use the tool, we're golden. Okay, so I've only got 15 minutes left, so I was not going to show you how the CSV piece works. But what that is just would have just read the CSV, the standard Python piece, where it opens the file and reads in the CSV and creates a dictionary. And then what happens is that the AI here, 3.7, takes my prompt, my initial prompt, says, oh, you want to read the CSV and do something with it? Then it passes that plus all the information that comes from the MCP tool, which is taking the signature, the function name and the signature and the type that it returns, passes all that plus my prompt into Claude Sonnet. Claude Sonnet says, oh, I need to call a function, tells the host, the Visual Studio Code host, or whichever one you're using, hey, you need to go make this function call. It does that. That's where the continue pops up. It does that action, and then it takes the results of reading the CSV file and brings it back into the conversation so that Claude Sonnet can go, oh, now I know what's going on in this particular file, and I'm ready to go. So that's just a quick overview or a quick run through of an MCP. And of course, that could be at least a 2-hour presentation. So let's talk a little bit about, well, what MCPs are, right? A universal interface for AI native development. So it's an open protocol. MCP is an open protocol for connecting AI models to tools and to data. That was what I was just showing you, right? It connected to a multiply. I would have demoed how it connected to data, and it would have been a CSV, but it's not limited to that, right? So if I wanted to connect it to a SQL Server database, or to Cosmos DB, or SQLite, or Postgres, I may have code that already does that, right? Maybe already authenticates and and I can authorize and authenticate through my code to those database, to those data and backends, and then they can now, as tools, play into the AI model space via the MCP protocol. So it's JSON based, works over standard IO, HTTP, or SSE, right? So there's a whole bunch of different ways, and again, so you can think of HTTP and SSE as being remote servers on or things on the internet that you can tap into. And what's cool is when I talked about grabbing a Python function and taking its signature, the name of the function, the name of all the parameters, the types that all the parameters are defined at, and what's going to get returned as a type from the function call, that's describing the tool capabilities. And that gets set up in a specific way that gets handed from the MCP server back into the MCP host. And then models invoke them like APIs. There's no SDKs involved, no plugins, no retraining required. You saw me, I just had a little Python function. I put a decorator on it from the SDK, and I created a 5-line mcp.json config, hit start, and I'm ready to go. This is standardized by Anthropic, and it's being adopted by Microsoft and OpenAI, Google's, and everybody else. All right, so the multi-host, one protocol, every interface. Everything from like IDEs, like I mentioned, Windsurf, Visual Studio Code, Cursor, CLIs like Aider and Klein, and edge devices. It's all the same contract for all of these. The host speaks JSON. Again, there's no SDKs, no friction. And you learn how to build your stuff once, and then you can reuse it everywhere. And your tools follow your team, not your tech, right? So if people want to use JetBrains, I believe they now have a MCP host, which is not difficult to write. So for these companies to build them into their tools, it's not a difficult process. So if it's not here, it'll be here very soon. And this isn't just cross-platform; it's cross-mindset. Wherever your devs go, the protocol goes with them. And for me, I know this smells a little bit like the old Java pitch, write once, run anywhere, and then you added the extra piece of test forever. This is not the same thing. It's not about bytecode. It's not about virtual machines. It's not about where the code runs. It's about how tools talk and making that conversation universal. Cool. So let's talk about some key uses for MCPs. AI coding assistance. Access entire code bases, docs, and dev tools via Git, GitHub, MCP servers. Better autocomplete, PR reviews, and refactors. And that's just one of the pieces of the AI coding assistance. Like I mentioned before, you can do with data. So there are pieces out of all these large companies that let you integrate with your SQL Server backends. Microsoft's letting it integrate with the Azure, and Amazon's following along as well. In terms of enterprise workflows, they have pieces now that can integrate with Jira, Confluence. Zapier has this free. You can go up today and you look for Zapier MCP, and you can find a way for free to turn on some of their tools, and then it uses the SSE interface. So as you saw me define the Python one, you just change the type to SSE, you put a URL in, and now you're connected to Zapier. And if you get more involved with the Zapier side, like if you want to do Google Sheets or your Google email, yes, you have to authenticate and give those credentials to it to make it work. Very simple though, straightforward. It's worth checking out. And then AI can read and write tickets, summarize docs, trigger workflows. And this is what the third-party companies are doing. And it's great to take a look, because then you get ideas of, well, what can I integrate? What code do I have that I'd like to integrate to my daily flow, whether it be in your company or personal. Data and analytics, NLP to SQL. So you can now prompt to SQL. And these MCPs are really cool because it does real-time schemas. So you can say, hey, here's my database. And the first thing it does when you say, show me how many albums sold in, 2020 that were more than this, and the amount of time that it played was an hour and a half. The first thing it does is it goes out, checks the schema of your entire database, and you can hone it down to just this set of tables. It figures out the schema, and then from that, the AI models can really, it just figures out what foreign keys, what constraints, and whatnot, so you can actually it can construct the SQL that you need in a really accurate way. And this works with Postgres and MySQL. An MCP host can analyze live business data or indexes like Elasticsearch. What else? Web and external info. So AI uses web search via MCP. I just put up a video on how I put that together. There's a few lines of code and it's done. Uses web search to pull live info or automate web actions, dynamic real-time context, right? So if you're familiar with ChatGPT Web, you can ask questions and click the search button, or it knows how to go out to the web to gather information today, not just based on the training date that it was cut off. Persistent context accesses files, projects, notes, or vector stores via MCP, enabling long-term memory and continuity across sessions. And that's just some of the things it can do, right? So with the persistent context, it can actually do certain types of improved RAG capabilities, retrieval augmented generation. So what it unlocks, less glue, more flow, right? Protocol first, no SDK friction. You didn't see me use an SDK. I started up standard Python with fast MCP. I annotated one of my functions, click start, and it was now part of the host's AI flow. It's one interface, reused by devs and AI assistants, and it exposes tools via HTTP or standard IO in minutes. It builds towards an agentic workflow without upfront complexity. And yes, so depending on if I'm asking questions to my CSV file, if it doesn't get the answer that it wants, it'll go back and reread the file or look at more information in it, and it'll take multi steps and multi turns to figure out, is it answering the question that I asked? So, and this can be any of your tools. So it gets really interesting. Governance and trust, agility without chaos. Lots of stuff going on in you saw when I hit the continue, that's host mediated permissions. You explicitly approve tool usage. There's auditing is optional. And many of the vendors are now coming out with ways that it turns on automatically for certain pieces, and then you can opt in or opt out of others. And then you can figure that out for your own code that you're providing. Maybe you're going to provide a third-party tool. And there's a lot of vendor collaboration. Right, Anthropic, Microsoft, and OpenAI, and Google are working on a lot of the standards. One of the papers were just put up by MCP today. Where this is going, I think next week there's another conference, the Dev MCP conference, and they're going to be talking a lot about this and the players that are actually doing the work on this. Emerging security patterns, prompt injection defense, endpoint control. So this is being treated very seriously, and lots of big brains are working on it. Where's it going? It's not a framework. It's a foundation we're at with this. From VS Code to Claude to no code, right? So Zapier, Claude Desktop, VS Code, Windsurf, all these different pieces. There's a bunch of tools inside of Azure now that are MCP hosts. I believe Fabric is one of them. So you can plug these tools in there. And you go from run this tool to own the loop, right? So you own what's going on in the AI flow, and you get to choose to say continue or not. And if you're building for this, you have even more control over it. Build, fix, deploy, no handoffs, right? You can just let your model do it, or you can do it within your code. So you have lots of ways to architect, many degrees of freedom to get this done. So MCP is how we wire agents into the real world. So this shift is not just about running tools. It's about building tools without asking for glue at every step. And again, you saw what I did with one function. It's that simple. We may have to rewrite a bunch of code. You certainly need to learn how to do prompt engineering and understand what data is actually being sent in the context through the MCP tool annotation, how your function and parameters and so on are being handed off, so it plays better into your context. So when you ask questions or your user asks questions, things can be figured out. So MCP is how we stop talking about agents and start building with them. This is my last slide, and just to say that in the span of a year, So I think this was dropped like in November of 2024. So in less than a year, MCPs have catalyzed a flurry of developer creativity by offering a unified way to extend models with tools and data. MCP has been key to unlocking novel applications, from coding co-pilots that understand entire code bases to enterprise bots that juggle multiple business apps, to assistants that can analyze real databases and agents that browse the web or maintain long-term memory. And there are other products out there. There's ROO, R-O-O, is heavily leveraging MCPs to great effect. And learning how to build these kind of things, learning how to eval these types of systems, that is really what you need to unlock this journey. So I don't know how am I on time? Oh, we got a couple of more minutes. But
yeah, a couple more minutes. We have some questions as well.
Great. Let's I figured I'd rush because I didn't see the clock. So let's answer some questions if we can.
Awesome. Yeah. So one question around manual vetting. So Frank here asks, manual vetting of an MCP is certainly not scalable. Ignoring warnings is dangerous. Any suggestions for fine-grained MCP ACLs?
Good question. So as I've been talking about and presenting on AI since late 2022, right? And your job as a developer does not end just because you can copy and paste something out of an AI chat. And it's the same challenge we had back with Stack Overflow as well as Google. You didn't just copy stuff you found, drop it in your editor, compile, and give it to production. You've got to vet it. You got to do the testing. This is not a magic bullet. This is a tool that you need to learn to leverage. And the more you use it, and the more you internalize how it works, the faster you'll go with it, because you'll be able to trust it more. In terms of ACLs, like I mentioned in the governance, next week they're going to be talking about it. Microsoft will be at that Dev Summit, and they'll be talking about how you can hook it up to Entra, and you can do, they're doing single sign SSO type stuff with these pieces. So this is not going to run rampant and crazy over your systems. So yes, they're thinking about it. Those are the people that get paid the high pay, the big bucks to solve these problems. I'm very confident. You know, Anthropic doesn't want this to come out in the first day you turn it on and it takes over your enterprise, right?
And that's a real like important thing, because I guess the follow up here was, how do we confirm the capabilities text is actually accurate to what it's actually trying to deliver and not malicious. So I guess we're probably hitting a lot of the same problems that we saw if you look back into the SCA world in and around malicious third-party libraries. Exactly. I guess from that point of view, is that there's an extra step which perhaps we're not quite there with MCPs, where you kind of like have that dependency graph. I'm not sure if we're quite there yet with the MCP graph.
No, we're not there. But the good thing is, when you even take a look at NPM libraries and open source, right? That always was a big problem. Like, right? We were very afraid in the enterprise space to bring it in open source. So you have to vet that. What does it mean to vet it? Who's responsible if it breaks? It's the same thing where we are. Again, this is not a magic bullet. Just because it's AI, this is not science fiction. If you don't do diligence, that's going to be a problem. But that's nothing new with us with software tools.
Yeah, excellent. A couple of people here, Frank, one of them, Michael, the other. Is MCP just a higher level REST? Also, or even us remote function calls? And I think there's a lot of similarities. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's good to draw these analogies towards these other systems, but again, they're analogies. They're not what it actually is. So in terms of REST calls and remote function calls, absolutely. But what this does is that through the simple MCP JSON spec that you're giving into the host, you're now including what you've done, right? So you can even wire up your remote function call or your other REST APIs give it to a REST to define what your tool does. And now it's going to play into an MCP host that does all the AI interaction for you and just calls you when it thinks it needs to. I don't know if that helps. So we're not, and that's the beauty of all this. We're not learning something new. All we're learning is, I want to annotate my Python function this way, and now I can play into the MCP space. And anything that has an MCP host, my code now works in it. That's crazy. But it doesn't matter if your code is a function, a remote function, an Azure function, a Lambda in Amazon, or it's another set of REST APIs. Now you can start bringing those together. Now you need to understand prompt engineering. And if you're giving it too much context, like, oh, I've got like 60 REST endpoints, let me just wrap those in. Well, the AI is going to get confused like you do. Which one do I pick? When do I pick it? Why do I pick it? How did you name your functions? How did you name your parameters? What kind of help documentation in just a little snippet of what this thing does becomes very important, because that becomes part of your context, which is basically just an enlarged prompt. So I don't know if that's helps.
Yeah, no,
good questions.
Yeah, there's another good one here actually around the difference between MCP and A2A, because I feel like MCP seems to have got so much of the news, and it's like the buzzword. A2A is quite similar though, right? And but doesn't seem to be taking off quite as much. What's the difference?
Well, that's a good point. Again, MCPs dropped in November. A2A just dropped in the last month. So let's give it a little bit of time. And they're very different. So agent to agent is really, so if you build an agent, it's not it could be something that's across the wire. It could be a remote MCP server. So it really helps you orchestrate multiple agents in different spaces, right? Whereas MCP is local to the process that's running it, whether it's an IDE or whether it's an ecosystem inside of one of the cloud providers, things like that. But keep an eye on the agent to agent, because Google dropped some really good stuff there.
Yeah. Awesome. I don't see any new comments in. I think we've had quite a few great questions there. Yeah, I mean, I actually just on that point actually of the fact that you know, what did we say? November? Did you say Anthropic dropped MCP?
Yep.
And then in the last month, A2A. This is technology that really hasn't been around for long at all. Yet
that's an understatement.
The adoption it's bizarre how fast that adoption's been.
When I looked at MCPs, and we can talk about the authentication in a second. When I looked at I played around with custom GPTs in OpenAI, and they were going to build a store, and you could build your own, and it was really cool. And I played around with a bunch of it, and then they kind of decided to back off from that. All of a sudden, so when I saw Anthropic put out MCPs, I just thought, oh, that's just another custom GPT, and I was wrong. And everybody, it was just, and like, it wasn't from my own. It's not that I looked into it and went, wow, this is amazing. It was like I just heard, again, I'm an MVP, so I just hear things different from different channels that others don't, and I was like, what is going on? And the entire AI space is crazy. We're going from monthly to weekly announcements on new user experiences, developer experiences, models getting better. We're going to be going to a daily. So, and these things, what we're seeing is going to be crazy. So authentication in MCP, yep, that's why I mentioned Entra ID. It's basically Microsoft's AD, and Anthropic and whatnot will be out at the conference next week, and they're doing, there's a GitHub repo that they're working on in the Anthropic GitHub space. You can follow along with the RFCs and whatnot, and they're building it they're building it in the open, and they got the top people working on it. They know it needs to be solved, and I'm confident they're going to solve it, because I know I'm not going to. So it's not there yet, but don't let that dissuade you, because you want to sit back and try these locally, so you begin to learn the process, so you can internalize. Well, what happens when I build these things and I connect them together, and how does the model work? It's a whole, right? It's like learning new third-party tools, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good way to kind of like talk about this, whereby without those kind of production level things that we need to be there to make sure that we're secure, this is more in the level of, let's see what we can do, let's play with it, but recognize what is lacking today in making this truly production grade quality that we can rely on. But certainly these things are coming, I'm sure, particularly given how much people are investing in playing around with these, and the sheer number of MCP servers around that people are building.
crazy.
It's going to be an amount of time whereby we just need to switch that on, I guess, in more productive.
Well, also, I mean, when we talk about authentication in MCP, just like the early days of GPT-3, right? I was learning from some of the great AI model, the ML and AI folks that were like, oh, guess what? If you structure your prompt with JSON in the front, have your question, and put JSON at the end, you can get these amazing capabilities. Well, OpenAI went back to the table and they trained the models based on that type of research. So we can do the MCP authentication ourselves today. You don't need to wait for everybody. There's nothing, it's just code, right? So you can actually build that into your function or whatever you're building. You're just getting called as a function from the AI, from the MCP host. So there's nothing, it's just a different way of doing calls into your program or to your endpoints, to your API, to your SDK. The rest you can handle. But we're going to be able to offload that once the authentication comes online for all the different places, and that's why they're going to standardize it. But it's just code, right? And I've built these agent systems myself without LangChain and all that kind of stuff, where I'm building my own loop, and I'm knowing when the model's saying, "Hey, I need you to call this function," and I do the function call in my code, and then return the result. It's a loop feedback and knowing when to do it and when to stop. Right. So it's not, and then all of a sudden they come out with MCPs do it for you. Awesome. And it does it even better because they have the geniuses working on it. So there's nothing, it's just, I hate to say it, it's just code, and it has access to an LLM, and they're just making it easier so you can get your job done.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to end the session there, Doug. And thank you very, very much for the session. It was very, very insightful. And I think this is definitely a hot topic right now, even in the hot bucket that is AI. So thank you very much for giving the session.
Thank you, Simon. Been a pleasure.